There are plenty of games that I've played over the years, and believe me, not all of them stick with me long after I roll credits, but Triangle Strategy is one that really has snuck up with me and stayed with me for years now. It's funny because when it released, I wasn't sure if I'd even love it. I remember a lot of people bouncing off of it for the slow burn start or having high expectations comparing it to Final Fantasy Tactics, which when this was released, I hadn't played it yet. But over time, I've actually really grown to appreciate Triangle Strategy so much. The distance from launch really just made me realize how rare this game really was. In an industry obsessed with spectacle and instant gratification and giant open worlds, Triangle Strategy really just committed to this dense political storytelling, giving you meaningful choices and combat that really just demands your full attention. It really just wants you to deep dive into the world instead of trying to entertain you every 5 seconds. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons I still love this game. So I can't wait to deep dive on Triangle Strategy. I wasn't really doing videos like this when Triangle Strategy was released, and I've made some stuff about Triangle Strategy and HD2D games over the last couple of months. So I figured let's just make a full retrospective piece on why I love this game so much. So before we get to that, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave your thoughts down below. Have you played this game? Do you love it? Did you bounce off of it? I'd be interested to know. So let's get to just a bit of a look back at the story. Now, one of the biggest reasons Triangle Strategy feels so memorable is because its story is grounded in politics rather than some Destiny story. Most JRPGs eventually escalate into fighting gods or saving reality or timelines or even defeating some cosmic evil threat that just challenges existence itself. But Triangle Strategy starts with something a little bit more real. Nations fighting over resources. Kind of boring, but you know what? It really grounds the story. The continent of Norzelia revolves around salt and iron, two commodities that completely define the balance of power between the kingdoms, and immediately makes the world feel more tangible. Wars aren't happening because somebody is evil. Well, I mean, we do eventually get there, but they're happening because some nations need leverage and a need to survive and control. You have the Kingdom of Glenbrook, the Grand Duchy of Esfrost, and then the Holy State of Hyzant. Everything all feels politically distinct, and more importantly, they feel understandable in their own way. Even when certain leaders make cruel or manipulative decisions, you can usually trace the logic behind why they believe they're justified. And this pretty much carries the entire narrative. Instead of clear-cut morality, the game pushes competing ideologies against each other. Freedom versus equality, faith versus truth, security versus liberty. And what makes it so compelling is that the game rarely gives you an answer to who is bad and who's doing the right thing. It really wants you to wrestle with those questions and gives you time and space to think. I mean, with all the three kingdoms, it really is a triangle strategy. Now, I haven't touched on the main hero yet, who is Lord Serenoa Wolfort, who's like an up-and-coming person within his own tribe or kingdom, whatever you want to call it, his own house. That's probably the better way to call it. And eventually something happens and he has to take this position of power. It's not necessarily something he wants, but it's a position that he's given. And I love his journey of following all of his decisions and his decision-making. And obviously it's up to you in order to choose all that stuff. It's very interesting, and he's a very wonderful main character and a really great testament to why I stuck with this game so much. Now, of course, Serenoa wouldn't be nearly as compelling without the people surrounding him. In many ways, Triangle Strategy's central conflict isn't just between nations, it's also about, the ideals represented by his closest allies. First, Roland begins as a kind of traditional prince, but evolves into one of the game's most fascinating characters, obviously wrestling with leadership on a bigger scale than Serenoa. Frederica carries the emotional heart of the story, challenging the injustices that have been accepted for so long and refusing to look away from people suffering simply because it's politically convenient. And then there's Benedict, who is a very compelling character. He's pragmatic, he's calculating, and willing to make the hard decisions even if he thinks that nobody's going to agree with him, and he's sure that they're going to secure a better future. None of those decisions are entirely right, none of them are entirely wrong, but that's why the game's biggest decisions work so well. So by the time the story reaches its final branching paths, you're pretty much choosing one ending that defines those three main support characters that have surrounded Serenoa. And another thing that I think really deserves credit for taking itself seriously without becoming completely miserable is the writing. There's some serious weight to the dialogue because every conversation feels connected to this larger series of political consequences. Alliances matter, trade matters, reputation matters, even small diplomatic decisions can spiral into massive conflicts later in the game. The game treats leadership as exhausting rather than glamorous, and Serenoa stands out because he often feels like less of a traditional JRPG protagonist and more like somebody who's desperately trying to hold impossible situations together while everybody pulls him in different directions. And that whole vibe gives the story its identity. You're really just navigating uncertainty, compromise, all these other things. And it has this pressure where every decision feels like it could totally destabilize the war or the continents, the alliances, everything. And that atmosphere, admittedly, is something that very few RPGs and JRPGs can do as well as triangle strategy. Now, the conviction system is one of my favorite decision-making mechanics in any game because it transforms choices into debates rather than simple menu selections. A lot of games present morality systems in like the laziest way possible. One option is obviously good, one option is obviously evil, and one option is kind of like doesn't matter. Triangle strategy throws that entire system out the window and just gives everything so much more weight. Instead of choosing outcomes directly, you have to persuade your party members through the scales of conviction and this conversation system, and suddenly every major story branch feels collaborative. Your allies have their own beliefs, of course, priorities, and they have their fears, and convincing them requires you to understand who they are as people. Sometimes logic works, sometimes emotional appeal works, and sometimes nothing works because your convictions throughout the game have already shaped how other people perceive you. And that system makes choices feel really well earned, so you've got to calculate, how can somebody feel if I select this as opposed to this? There are multiple endings for a reason, and it's one thing that we can touch on here shortly. What's genius about this is how obviously uncomfortable many of these decisions feel. The game forces you into situations where there is no universally correct answer. You got to protect some people, but it might require sacrificing innocence. Telling the truth might destroy alliances. Preserving peace might mean working with the bad guys. The game understands that politics is often about choosing, between flawed outcomes rather than the best ideal ones. And because of that, every vote carries a lot of weight. I remember reaching several points where I just sat there for minutes trying to figure out what I actually believed was right, not what would give me the best ending. Because my first playthrough, I just wanted to see what happened, because I didn't really realize there was a golden route until well over the halfway point, and I just figured, let's just ride this out and see where this goes, and then I can double back and try and preserve everything to be the correct way so I can get the best ending. But I don't do that with many games. I don't usually go back and play games a second time. And I watched all the endings on YouTube after I did, my 2 playthroughs. But man, it was so excellent. Triangle strategy had this really unique way of keeping all of the dilemmas morally messy. Even now you can still debate which routes are justified because the game gives legitimate arguments to multiple character perspectives. And the branching structure also really increases the game's replay value. Different routes fundamentally reshape storylines, character alliances, and outcomes. Entire chapters change depending on your decisions, and certain revelations completely recontextualize previous events depending on which path you take. So definitely going to get bang for your buck with this game if you haven't played it yet, because there's, I believe, 4 different endings, one of which is the best ending. So few games commit this hard to branching storytelling anymore, but Triangle Strategy totally nailed it. And plus, it looks beautiful in HD 2D as well. So not only does the story, resonate with me, but man, it's gorgeous to look at too. Now, hang on, before we talk any more Triangle Strategy, did you guys know that almost like 85% of the people that watch my channel on the regular are not subscribed? So if you would like more weekly retrospectives, deep dives, top 10s, lists, all that fun stuff, and news now, I would love to have you here. So hit that subscribe button. It really means a lot in supporting the channel. And yeah, let's get back to the video now. Now, the combat system is another reason why this game continues to stick with me, because it understands exactly what makes a tactical RPG super satisfying. Some strategy games can feel dominated or overpowered by builds or grinding, where raw stats matter more than positioning or whatever, but Triangle Strategy totally nailed this for me. Every encounter matters, elevation matters, direction matters, hazards matter, like all that kind of stuff. You can't just rush forward and overpower enemies without consequences, because the game, I believe, is designed around tactical discipline rather than brute force. But yes, sometimes you can brute force your way into it. Doesn't mean that everybody's going to survive by the end of the battle. I did do that a couple times, but the gameplay loop is really fun and addictive, and I really just took my time with this, and I think you guys would too if you haven't played it yet, or if you have played it, you probably know what I'm talking about. What I love most is how distinct every character feels. Instead of generic interchangeable units or changing jobs, which sometimes admittedly gives me option paralysis, each party member has a clearly defined role and personality within combat. And the balance there creates experimentation naturally, because different encounters encourage different team compositions. And I would recommend tweaking all that and trying to level everybody up. Once you get into it, it starts making sense and everything starts to click. The turn system is also fantastic because it has a really great flow to it. Actions occur individually rather than through like traditional player-enemy phases, so positioning becomes incredibly important, and setting up follow attacks, kind of predicting enemy movement, and controlling cutoff points all become essential to your survival. There were battles where I barely scraped through because I had one unit left, and all those victories felt really incredibly precise because the game demands that you think rather than just throwing guys at the at the enemies on the map. And some maps almost feel like puzzles too, where underestimating your layouts or the enemies as well is just as important as understanding your abilities. And the difficulty deserves praise too. I mean, Triangle Strategy isn't interested in making you feel overpowered all the time. Certain encounters are brutal, and especially early on when your roster and resources are limited, but challenge reinforces the political atmosphere and the tension of the game. Battles feel desperate because you're desperate to win. Defense feels exhausting, victories feel costly, and the gameplay and the narrative constantly support each other tonally. So that's one part of the reason why this whole thing feels 100% cohesive. Now, it's impossible to talk about Triangle Strategy without comparing it to Final Fantasy Tactics. Now, as I alluded to in the intro, when Triangle Strategy came out, I hadn't actually played Final Fantasy Tactics yet, but now, over the last couple months, if you've been following my channel, you know that I played the remastered version of Final Fantasy Tactics. I loved it, and I've had some people ask me, which one do you prefer? Which one's better? It's hard to say, but they can both coexist and support each other wonderfully. I mean, the influences are obvious. Political intrigue, classically inspired fantasy aesthetics, war-driven storytelling, morally gray conflicts, it's all there. I think one of the biggest problems surrounding Triangle Strategy at launch was people wanted it to recreate something like Final Fantasy Tactics rather than allowing it to establish its own identity. And I think enough time has gone by that, at least for me, and especially again, not having played Tactics at that time, this is a total standout game, and I actually like this more than Final Fantasy Tactics. But Final Fantasy Tactics is legendary for a reason. Its writing, the job system, and the atmosphere is so good. But Triangle Strategy was never trying to be a clone of Final Fantasy Tactics. It doesn't have a customizable job system because I think it was more interested in having some more individual units. It didn't really revolve around one tragic anti-hero in the same way that Ramza does, because it focuses more heavily on collective political tension, and the pacing is a little bit slower, more dialogue heavy, and more procedural, because I think the developers of Triangle Strategy wanted the players to feel the burden of governance and diplomacy rather than just moving from battle to battle. So I think Triangle Strategy deserves some real credit here for understanding what made those older tactical RPGs resonate without blindly copying everything. The game captures that same feeling of ideological conflict and wartime uncertainty, while obviously still making things feel modern in some way, shape, or form. And like I mentioned before, the HD 2D art just is a gorgeous visual identity. I think it just really dips into that nostalgic feeling without overly being trapped in nostalgia. Some scenes are genuinely stunning, especially some of the nighttime stuff where, you know, all the lighting effects are happening, or even the snow is what, like, it's just so good. And it's one of those art styles that constantly gives this game its personality. Now, one thing I mentioned before is the golden route. And if you haven't played it, I don't think this video is going to be super spoiler heavy anyway. This is more of a general broad look back, but the golden route of this game, the perfect ending, is one of the most genuinely hard-earned, satisfying endings I've ever played in a JRPG. And chances are, if you've done it and you've done the golden route, it's so good, you probably agree with me here. So in many RPGs, the true ending is just something that you unlock automatically by making obviously correct choices or completing extra content. But Triangle Strategy structures its best outcome around knowledge, sacrifice, and understanding all of the political systems of the world, enough to challenge them effectively. And by the time you get to that golden route, you've likely already experienced the painful compromises and the disastrous consequences of, previous endings. In my case, I only did one ending before, but that history matters because it reframes the final outcome as something built through experience rather than just simple wish fulfillment. I think that's really important to understand. What makes the ending super satisfying is that it doesn't magically erase the complexity of the world. Peace still requires difficult cooperation. Ideological divides don't disappear overnight, but there is a sense that the characters have finally broken free from some of the cycles of manipulation and exploitation controlling Norzelia for generations. This game in its own right is really a break the chains of fate kind of thing, done through a political storytelling lens. It's really interesting. The game spends so much time exploring feelings of despair and corruption and political failure that feeling of optimism that you get by the time you roll credits and get the best ending is so sweet. It's very interesting because you could say that all of the different routes that aren't the perfect ending are kind of like philosophical arguments on how you would approach war or political divides. And that's why I think if you were to play this game, do your first playthrough blind, and then you can go back and do the golden route and then watch the other 2 endings that you didn't get on YouTube, which is what I did because I'm not going to play through the game like 4 times. But there's so much to say about all your choices and all the tension and all the politics of it. It's really fun, and it's a great food for thought kind of game too, which is what I really like. I genuinely think that Triangle Strategy is one of those games that's going to age extremely well because it wasn't designed around trends. It wasn't chasing giant open world checklists or a cinematic spectacle. It focused on writing and systems and player agency. Those things tend to last. Years from now, I think people are going to revisit Triangle Strategy and realize how refreshing it was to play a game that trusted you to engage with this complicated political storytelling web without oversimplifying anything. There's also something refreshing about how sincere this game is. It does not feel cynical, it doesn't undercut emotional moments with jokes. This takes the world seriously, and it asks you to do the same thing. That level of commitment gives the experience a unique identity that many modern RPGs lack. Even if you disagree with certain pacing choices or story decisions, it's hard to deny that Triangle Strategy knew exactly what it wanted to be. And honestly, I really miss games like this. Games that are willing to slow down, take time to breathe, and again, just trust that you are going to fully understand this story, even if you have to play through it another time. Triangle Strategy understands really well that tension can come from politics just as effectively as combat, and both of those things work harmoniously, and understanding that makes it feel super unique even years later. So that's ultimately why I still love Triangle Strategy. It is obviously not a flawless experience, but it's a very purposeful one. Every system, every debate, every battle, every branching decision feeds into a larger theme of leadership and ideology. It's a game about power and the cost of maintaining it, a game about compromise and conviction, and a game that constantly asks what you're willing to give up in order to have a better future. And maybe most importantly, it's a game that trusted me to hold my attention to it, allow me to think, allow me to breathe, and have some time with the decision making as well. So years later, I still think about the music, the characters, the world of Norzelia. I still think about the votes and the convictions and the scale, like all that fun stuff. It was so fun. And the combat system, everything. This was a perfect lightning in a bottle game, and I'm quite happy to say this is probably sitting in my top 5 games of all time. Because, I mean, great games entertain you while you're playing them. That's all well and fine. But the special ones, they stay with you long after you roll credits. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys enjoy Triangle Strategy as well. I would love to see something else in the same vein or vibe as Triangle Strategy. There's probably not a whole lot of room for a sequel or a prequel. I think it's really great to have a one-off story, but I'd love to see more tactical stuff from Square Enix. Let me know if you agree in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in another video very soon. Bye-bye.